Alright, let's just jump straight to the point. I did not like Terminator Zero, and I'm kinda disappointed by that. Because, look, I'm not a hardcore Terminator fan, but I do love this series. It is a mess of a franchise with every sequel after Judgment Day acting like a reboot, sequel, prequel, remake, whatever you want to call it, a reboot-quel if you will. But even despite all of the flaws these movies present, I still find some form of enjoyment in them. And yes, I do think there are good parts in Terminator Zero, but as a whole, this show just didn't really click for me. I'll start with the thing I dislike the most about this show. It's boring. Look, I can tolerate the slowest of stories. Heck, most people thought House of the Dragon Season 2 was boring, and I thought it was pretty engaging from beginning to end. But this got me bored. The show is only 8 episodes long and about 25 minutes in length for each episode, which already makes it shorter than the average seasonal anime. But I feel like even with this short span, it's still longer than it needed to be. So the story focuses on a lot of characters, all of whom are connected because they are family, but are separated in different groups during the chaos of Judgment Day. We have Malcolm, who is a scientist locked in a room with Kokoro, an AI he invented in the hopes it would become humanity's weapon against Skynet. We have Reika, who is Malcolm's daughter, along with a resistance soldier from the future who's looking for Malcolm. And then there's Misaki, the housekeeper, who's looking after Malcolm's other children, Kenta and Hiro. And yeah, there's a Terminator roaming around, I guess. Do you see how there's a lot of perspectives to follow? I find myself questioning which one is the show trying to pivot the most in terms of who's the main character, but it feels like the show wants us to care about all of them, and the result is that I cared about none of them, except for one, which is Misaki, because out of all of the characters, she's probably the only one in my opinion that actually feels like a character, and I kind of feel like she also should have just been the main character, as in like she should have been the main focus of the story. Because while her story isn't anything new per se, it is probably the most interesting within the show because the story itself is pretty by the books. If you've ever watched a Terminator movie, then you pretty much know where the plot is going to go, which makes the pacing all the more painful to me. Because the show as a whole is structured like a Terminator film. We start with the war in the future, we go back in time, we find our target objective, you know the drill. But instead of watching a 2-hour-long film, it felt like that 2-hour runtime was unnecessarily stretched into 3.5 hours long, and scenes that should have been over quick are dragged so much that you just wanted it to be over quickly. An example would be the scenes between Malcolm and his AI creation Kokoro. Their scenes are pretty typical in a story about creation and intelligence, a philosophical discussion of what it means to be human, or more precisely what it means to be alive, and whether or not we are created to do good with the tendency of becoming evil or the other way around. The very typical stuff, right? You see it in almost every sci-fi story. The problem here is that they kept talking about it again and again and again and again every episode at long lengths that it becomes excruciatingly repetitive because most of the time it's not really advancing the story whatsoever. It becomes what I call thematic exposition, where the show is hand-holding the audience through its deeper meanings. And a lot of these scenes felt unnecessary to me because what it's actually doing is lessening the impact of these discussions when it's obviously trying to be more profound than it is. This is what I meant earlier when I said this show should have been shorter, and it's even more frustrating to me when I actually started to feel invested in the last 2 episodes. There are some plot reveals and character revelations that got me interested, but it feels too little too late. Having said all that, I actually wouldn't mind a second season, mostly due to how the final episode concluded with a second season bait, but also due to how certain characters are left in the finale. Like I said, Misaki is probably my favorite character in the show, and I am interested to see where the story is going to take her if they do make a sequel season. Eiko, the resistance soldier from the future, was very underutilized within the story. She's pretty one-dimensional, I would say, but again, with how things concluded, she now has this more important presence within the story. Same thing with Malcolm's children. Do you see where I'm going with this? And wait a minute, hold on. Matt, this is called Terminator Zero. You haven't talked about the Terminator yet. How's the Terminator? Well, he's there sometimes. He'll pop out on screen every now and again. He's not good in this. I haven't talked about the Terminator because I don't think he has that much presence in the show. Yeah, he's here to kill Malcolm, but like, he's not that menacing to me. He kills a lot of people, but I never really felt any danger from him. Like, every Terminator has a personality, right? Even when they're this emotionless killing machine. That is personality, a scary and terrifying one. Does Terminator try to emulate that emotionless character, but instead of feeling terrified at his lack of emotion, I just felt bored and uninterested. Because honestly, I feel more threat and danger from Kokoro, since it is basically equivalent to Skynet in this show, except it hasn't determined whether or not humanity should be wiped out from the face of the earth. So, waiting on Kokoro's final decision was, to me, more dreadful. The Terminator unable to catch a bunch of kids throughout the show, not so much. Finishing off this video by talking about some technical stuff, I think the animation is alright. It's solid enough to feel consistent, though knowing Production IG, the studio behind this show, they could have done a lot better. Like, this anime didn't blow me away on a technical level, though I think one action scene at the start was pretty good, and some of the show's use of CG elements were good enough. Gonna be honest here, I thought the direction and cinematography was pretty meh. Again, compared to other shows the studio has produced, it felt more like a side project to me. I also watched the Japanese version of this instead of the English version, so I can't really speak on how the English VAs sound like, but I don't think there were any standout performances in the Japanese version. I think the VAs did a good job at it, but nothing that made me go, wow, you know what I mean? And finally, I do find the soundtrack to be rather disappointing. I don't think it elevated much of the scenes that it played on, and there weren't any memorable tracks in my opinion as well. And that's pretty much my thoughts on Terminator Zero. Like I said, I felt rather disappointed with the show because I do see the potential and some of the ideas it presented were interesting, but the way it was presented wasn't as engaging to me. I've heard quite a lot of people actually enjoyed the show, so let me know your thoughts if you have seen the show in the comments. What did you like about it? Do you agree with some of my takes? Do you disagree with them? Thank you all for watching. Take care everybody and have a nice day.